The icy mountain water clawed at Sophia Blackwood's skirts, dragging her deeper into the rushing current as panic seized her chest. She could barely comprehend what was happening. One moment, she had been walking beside the stagecoach during a rest stop. The next, she was being forcibly shoved toward the raging river by the very men who had seemed so gentlemanly at the start of their journey from Denver. "You should have kept your nose out of our business, Miss Blackwood," snarled Harvey Wells, the banker who had been seated across from her during their 3-day journey. His elegant suit couldn't mask the ugliness in his expression as he and his partner pushed her closer to the edge. "Nobody needs to know what you overheard." Sophia's fingers clutched at rocks, at twigs, at anything to prevent her inevitable plunge into the frigid waters of the Colorado River. Her efforts were futile as the men's combined strength overcame her desperate resistance. The water reached her waist now, the current already threatening to sweep her feet from beneath her. "Please," she gasped, knowing it was useless to appeal to these men who had revealed their true nature. "I won't tell anyone about the bank robbery plans, I swear it." "Too late for that," Wells replied coldly, giving her one final shove. Sophia screamed as she felt herself falling backward, the roar of the river drowning out all other sounds. The water enveloped her, shocking her system with its biting cold. She flailed desperately, her heavy skirts becoming waterlogged anchors pulling her under. The current spun her mercilessly, disorienting her as she fought to keep her head above water. Through water-blurred vision, she caught sight of the 2 men hurrying back toward the stagecoach, clearly intending to continue their journey as though nothing had happened, as though they hadn't just committed murder. Her lungs burned as she swallowed water, the river carrying her downstream at frightening speed. Just as darkness began to creep into the edges of her vision, Sophia heard a shout from the riverbank. A tall figure on horseback galloped alongside the river, keeping pace with her as she was swept along. "Grab my hand if you want to live," the cowboy called out, his voice cutting through her panic like a lifeline. Sophia thrust her arm out of the water with the last of her strength, fingers stretching toward the stranger who had appeared like an apparition of hope. The cowboy leaned dangerously from his saddle, his own arm extended as his horse ran parallel to the river's edge. Their fingers brushed once, twice, and then his strong hand clasped around her wrist in a grip so firm it hurt. With a powerful heave, he began to pull her from the current's deadly embrace. "I've got you," he assured her, his voice steady despite the strain evident in his features as he fought against the river's pull. "Don't give up now." Water streaming from her clothes, Sophia found herself being hauled from the river and onto the back of the cowboy's horse. She coughed violently, expelling river water from her lungs as her rescuer urged his mount away from the dangerous bank. "Thank you," she managed to gasp between desperate breaths. "They tried to kill me." "Hold tight," was all he said in response, his voice a deep rumble she felt through her back where she was pressed against his chest. "We need to get you warm before the cold takes you." As the horse cantered away from the river, Sophia clung to consciousness and to her mysterious savior, aware that her life had irrevocably changed in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. All she knew with certainty was that the man whose strong arms encircled her was the only thing standing between her and death in this wild, unforgiving land. Dawn Hollister had been tracking the stage for the better part of 2 days, following at a distance that wouldn't raise suspicion. The Wells brothers had a reputation throughout Colorado territory, and when Dawn had caught wind of their latest scheme planning to rob the Denver City Bank, he knew it was his chance to finally bring them to justice. What he hadn't counted on was an innocent woman being thrown into the river. He'd been watching through his spyglass when he saw the confrontation, spurring his stallion into action before he'd even had time to think. Now, with the soaking wet woman clutching weakly to his saddle horn, he realized his pursuit of the Wells brothers would have to wait. "My cabin's not far," he told her, feeling her shiver violently against him. April in the Colorado territory was no time for an unplanned swim. "What's your name, Miss Sophia?" she managed through chattering teeth. Sophia Blackwood, Miss Blackwood, I'm Dawn Hollister. You hang on just a little longer. His cabin came into view as they crested a small rise, a sturdy structure of logs with a stone chimney that he'd built with his own hands 3 years ago after leaving Texas. It wasn't much, but it was solid, and more importantly right now, it had a fireplace. Dawn dismounted quickly and lifted Sophia from the saddle as though she weighed nothing, carrying her toward the cabin door. She was barely conscious now, her lips tinged blue, her complexion ashen. "Stay with me, Miss Blackwood," he urged as he shouldered open the door and carried her inside. The cabin was simple but neat, one main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a small kitchen area, and a bed in the corner. Dawn placed Sophia on a bearskin rug near the fireplace and quickly set about starting a fire, his movements efficient and practiced. "Those men," Sophia whispered, her eyes fluttering open as warmth began to fill the cabin. "They're planning to rob the Denver City Bank. I overheard them talking when they thought I was asleep." Dawn nodded grimly as he fed another log to the growing flames. "The Wells brothers. I've been after them for a while now." Her eyes widened. "You're a lawman, used to be Texas Ranger, now I hunt bounties." He didn't elaborate further, instead moving to a trunk where he pulled out a woolen blanket. "Miss Blackwood, you need to get out of those wet clothes or you'll catch your death." "I'll step outside while you know," panic flashed across her face. "Please don't leave me alone, I can't seem to move my fingers properly." Dawn hesitated, propriety warring with practicality. After a moment he nodded once. "I'll help you, but only what's necessary. I promise I'm a gentleman, despite appearances." Sophia looked at him, then truly looked at him for the first time. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw. Deep-set eyes, the color of a summer storm, regarded her steadily from beneath the brim of his hat. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and despite his rough exterior, there was something in his manner that made her trust him. "I believe you," she said simply. With as much propriety as the situation allowed, Dawn helped Sophia remove her outer garments, keeping his eyes averted and leaving her in her chemise and petticoat. He wrapped the blanket around her securely, then went to prepare something hot to drink. "How did you come to be on that stagecoach?" he asked, partly to distract her and partly because he needed to understand her situation better. Sophia huddled closer to the fire, color slowly returning to her cheeks. "I was traveling to Silver Creek to take a position as a schoolteacher. After my father died last winter, there was nothing left for me in Boston. I answered an advertisement seeking an educated woman to teach the children in a growing mining town." Dawn nodded as he set a mug of hot coffee in her hands, helping her steady it when her fingers trembled. "Silver Creek's about 2 days' ride from here. It's grown considerably in the last year since they struck a new silver vein." "Do you think those men will come looking for me?" Fear crept back into her voice. "Not likely. They probably think you drowned." Dawn settled himself on the floor across from her, his back against a chair. "But they'll be mighty surprised when I bring them in and you testify against them." Sophia's gaze snapped to his. "You're still going after them." "It's what I do, Miss Blackwood. They're wanted men with a sizable bounty on their heads, and now they've added attempted murder to their crimes." She stared into the dancing flames, absorbing this information. "I've never testified against anyone before. I've never even been in a courtroom." "First time for everything," Dawn said with a slight smile that transformed his stern features. "But first, you need to rest and recover. We can talk more about what happens next in the morning." As night fell over the cabin, Sophia found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She lay in Dawn's bed, which he had insisted she take while he made do with a bedroll near the fire, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness. The events of the day kept replaying in her mind: the shocking betrayal, the terrifying moments in the river, and the unexpected rescue by this enigmatic man who now slept several feet away. She turned her head to study his profile in the dying firelight. His features were relaxed in sleep, making him look younger, less hardened by whatever experiences had shaped him. Sophia wondered what had transformed a Texas Ranger into a solitary bounty hunter in the Colorado wilderness. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, words he couldn't hear but that she needed to say again. "For saving my life." Morning came with golden light filtering through the cabin's single window. Sophia woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement. Dawn was already up, tending to something at the small stove. "Your clothes are dry," he said without turning, somehow sensing she was awake. "I hung them near the fire last night. Thank you." Sophia sat up, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Her body ached from the previous day's ordeal, but the deadly chill had left her bones. Dawn placed a plate of food on the table, fried salt pork and biscuits, before stepping outside to give her privacy to dress. When he returned, she was seated at the table, her hair combed but still loose around her shoulders without the pins that had been lost to the river. "We need to discuss what happens next," Dawn said as he poured coffee for them both. "Those men are heading to Denver. I need to get there before they rob that bank and disappear." "And me?" Sophia asked quietly. Dawn met her gaze directly. "That depends on you, Miss Blackwood. You could continue to Silver Creek as planned, or you could come with me to Denver to testify against the Wells brothers." "Would my testimony truly help? They'll deny everything. Your word against theirs might not be enough, which is why I plan to catch them in the act." He took a sip of his coffee. "But having you identify them as the men who tried to kill you would add to their sentences." Sophia considered this as she picked at her food. The position in Silver Creek had been her chance at a new beginning after losing everything in Boston, yet the thought of those men going free to harm others troubled her deeply. "I'll go with you," she decided. "I want to see justice done." Dawn nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "We'll leave within the hour. It's a 3-day ride to Denver if we push hard. 3 days, but Sophia faltered, realizing the implications. 3 days of traveling alone with a man she barely knew, sleeping under the stars, far from the propriety she'd been raised to observe. As if reading her thoughts, Dawn spoke quietly. "I understand your concerns, Miss Blackwood. Your reputation is at stake. But I give you my word as a former ranger that I'll conduct myself honorably, and when we reach Denver, we can tell folks you were under my protection as a witness." His straightforward manner reassured her. "Very well, Mr. Hollister, I place my trust in you." "Dawn," he corrected her. "Out here, formalities seem a bit pointless after fishing someone from a river." Despite everything, Sophia found herself smiling. "Then you must call me Sophia." They set out an hour later, Sophia riding behind Dawn on his stallion. He had explained that his pack mule had gone lame 2 days before, which was why he had only the one mount. "We'll buy you a horse in the next town," he promised as they headed west, following a trail that Sophia could barely discern but that Dawn navigated with confidence. The day passed in relative silence, broken only by Dawn's occasional comments about the landscape or warnings about the trail. By midday, Sophia's muscles were protesting the unaccustomed activity, but she said nothing, determined not to slow their progress. When they stopped to rest the horse and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, Dawn studied her with those perceptive gray eyes. "You're in pain," he stated. "I'm fine," Sophia insisted, straightening her spine despite the ache. Dawn shook his head. "You're unused to riding." "There's no shame in that. I won't be the reason those men escape justice," she said firmly, something like admiration flickered in his expression. "Stubborn," he remarked, but there was no criticism in his tone. "Here." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small tin. "Liniment. It'll help with the soreness." Their fingers brushed as she accepted the tin, and Sophia felt an unexpected warmth that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. She quickly attributed it to gratitude and exhaustion. They continued their journey until dusk, when Dawn selected a sheltered spot near a small stream to make camp. He efficiently gathered wood for a fire while Sophia stood awkwardly, unsure of her role. "Have you ever camped before?" Dawn asked, noticing her hesitation. "No," she admitted. "My father was a professor. Our adventures were confined to books." Dawn nodded. "Then I'll teach you. Knowledge is never wasted out here." He showed her how to arrange stones for a fire pit, how to stack kindling for the best burn, and how to keep the flames manageable. As darkness fell, Sophia felt a small sense of accomplishment at having contributed to their camp. "Tomorrow we'll reach Elk Creek," Dawn told her as they sat beside the fire, eating beans he'd heated in a small pot. "It's not much of a town, but we can restock supplies and maybe find you a horse." "How did you become a bounty hunter?" Sophia asked, curiosity finally overcoming her reserve. Dawn was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost lost beneath the crackling of the fire. "I was a ranger for 8 years. Believed in the law, in justice. Then my partner and I tracked a gang to a remote ranch. We were ambushed. He died in my arms while the gang escaped." His jaw tightened at the memory. The law couldn't touch them, too many alibis, too much money changing hands. "So I turned in my badge and decided to bring them to justice my way." "Did you find them, I mean?" "Every last one," Dawn confirmed, his expression hard in the firelight. "Took me 2 years. And after that," Sophia pressed gently. "After that, I found I was good at tracking men the law couldn't catch. There's no shortage of work for someone with my skills." He poked at the fire with a stick. "What about you? How does a Boston professor's daughter end up heading to a mining town to teach?" It was Sophia's turn to look into the flames. "My father died of pneumonia last winter. He had debts I wasn't aware of. Everything had to be sold to satisfy his creditors, our home, his books, even my mother's jewelry." She swallowed hard. "I needed to support myself, and teaching was the only respectable profession I could pursue with my education." "I'm sorry about your father," Dawn said simply. "Thank you." Sophia wrapped her arms around her knees. "It's strange how quickly life can change. A week ago, I was on a train heading west, full of plans and hopes for my new position. Now I'm sitting by a campfire with a bounty hunter, running from men who tried to kill me. Life out here doesn't follow Eastern schedules," Dawn remarked with a hint of wry humor. "Best get some sleep. We have another long day tomorrow." He arranged his bedroll for her and fashioned a makeshift bed for himself on the opposite side of the fire. As Sophia lay looking up at the vast canopy of stars, she found herself thinking that despite the danger and uncertainty, there was something exhilarating about this unexpected turn her life had taken. Dawn Hollister was not a man given to distraction. Throughout his years as a ranger and then a bounty hunter, he had maintained a singular focus on whatever task lay before him. Yet as they rode toward Elk Creek the next day, he found his thoughts repeatedly drifting to the woman seated behind him. Sophia Blackwood was unlike any female he'd encountered in his travels. Despite her genteel upbringing, she showed a remarkable resilience. She hadn't complained once about the discomforts of their journey, though he could tell she was struggling with the physical demands. More importantly, she had chosen to pursue justice rather than her own comfort, a decision that spoke to her character. "There it is," Dawn announced as they crested a hill around midday. Below them lay Elk Creek, a collection of wooden buildings straddling a rutted main street. "Not much to look at, but they have a general store and a livery." "It looks wonderful to me," Sophia replied with genuine enthusiasm. Dawn felt a smile tug at his lips. The simplicity of her delight was refreshing in a world where he typically dealt with the darkest aspects of human nature. As they rode into town, he was acutely aware of the curious glances they attracted. A travel-worn man with a beautiful woman riding behind him was bound to raise eyebrows, especially in a small settlement like Elk Creek. "Let me do the talking," he murmured as they dismounted in front of the general store. These small towns run on gossip. Inside the store, Dawn purchased supplies while Sophia browsed the limited selection of goods. The storekeeper, a balding man with suspicious eyes, watched them both carefully. "You folks passing through?" he asked, measuring coffee beans into a paper sack. "Heading to Denver," Dawn replied with just enough information to satisfy curiosity without inviting more questions. "Got family there?" The man persisted. Dawn fixed him with a level stare. "Business." The storekeeper seemed to sense it was best not to pry further and silently completed their transaction. As they left the store, Dawn placed a protective hand at the small of Sophia's back, guiding her toward the livery stable. Was that necessary? She asked quietly, referring to his brusque manner with the storekeeper. The less people know about us, the better. Word travels fast, and if the Wells brothers have friends in these parts, I don't want them getting advance notice we're coming. At the livery, they found a suitable mare for Sophia, a gentle bay that the stable owner was willing to sell at a reasonable price. Dawn inspected the horse thoroughly before agreeing to the purchase. "Can you ride on your own?" he asked Sophia as he adjusted the saddle. "It's been some years, but yes. My father insisted I learn the basics. Good, it'll be easier on both of us with separate mounts." They left Elk Creek within the hour, Sophia growing more comfortable on her mare as they continued westward. The terrain became more rugged, the trail winding through stands of pine and aspen. Dawn kept a vigilant eye on their surroundings, his hand never far from the revolver at his hip. "Are you expecting trouble?" Sophia asked, noticing his alertness. "I always expect trouble," Dawn replied. "Keeps me alive." As the afternoon waned, dark clouds began to gather on the horizon. Dawn frowned at the sky, calculating distances and options. "Storm's coming. We need to find shelter before it hits." They pushed their horses harder, Dawn leading them off the main trail onto a less obvious path that climbed into the foothills. Just as the first fat raindrops began to fall, a small cabin came into view, nestled against a rocky outcropping. "Line shack," Dawn explained as they approached. "Used by cowhands during roundup, should be empty this time of year." The cabin was indeed deserted, a single room with a small fireplace, a rough table, and a set of bunks built into one wall. It was dusty but solid, the roof intact enough to keep out the rain that was now falling in earnest. "We got lucky," Dawn said as he lit a lantern he found on a shelf. "There's even some dry firewood." While he built a fire, Sophia shook the dust from the sparse bedding and arranged their supplies. Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the small windows and thunder rolling across the mountains. "Will this delay us significantly?" she asked, concerned about losing time in their pursuit. "A day at most. The Wells brothers won't move on the bank immediately. They'll need to scout it first, establish a routine." Dawn added another log to the growing fire. "We'll still reach Denver in time." They prepared a simple meal from their supplies, the small cabin growing warm and surprisingly comfortable as the storm raged outside. Sitting across the table from each other, they fell into conversation more easily than before, the shared adventure gradually dissolving the barriers between them. "Tell me about Boston," Dawn said as they finished their food. "I've never been east of the Mississippi." Sophia's face lit up as she described the city of her birth, the common with its tall elms, the elegant townhouses of Beacon Hill, the bookshops along Washington Street that had been her favorite haunts. Dawn listened intently, trying to picture this world so different from his own. "You must find all this very primitive in comparison," he remarked, gesturing to their rustic surroundings. "Different, certainly. But there's a honesty to life out here that I find refreshing." Sophia hesitated, then continued. "In Boston, everything is governed by social rules and appearances. People rarely say what they truly think or feel. Out here, it seems there's less pretense." "There's plenty of liars and cheats out west," Dawn countered. "Just different kinds. Perhaps, but you're not one of them." She met his gaze directly. "You say exactly what you mean." Dawn found himself unexpectedly moved by her perception. Not much point in doing otherwise. Words are like bullets once fired, you can't take them back. A particularly loud crack of thunder made Sophia jump, breaking the moment of connection between them. Dawn rose to check that the horses were secure in the lean to shelter adjacent to the cabin. When he returned, rain dripping from his hat and coat, he found Sophia standing by the fire, her expression troubled. "What is it?" he asked, hanging his wet garments near the hearth. "I was just thinking about what awaits in Denver. I've never testified in court before. What if I fail? What if they're not convicted?" Dawn moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his presence but not so near as to be improper. "Justice isn't always perfect," he said quietly. But doing nothing guarantees nothing changes. You're standing up when many would walk away. That takes courage. I don't feel particularly courageous, she admitted. Mostly I feel afraid. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. Sophia turned to look at him, the firelight casting a warm glow on her features. Is that what you do? Act despite your fears? Something shifted in Dawn's expression, a momentary vulnerability quickly masked. I learned long ago that fear is a luxury I can't afford in my line of work. Everyone fears something, Mr. Hollister. Dawn, he reminded her gently. Dawn, she repeated, his name sounding different when shaped by her lips. For a moment they stood in silence, the storm and the crackling fire the only sounds in the small cabin. Dawn became acutely aware of her presence, the faint scent of lavender that somehow persisted despite their travels, the way the firelight caught in her hair, the steady gaze that seemed to see past his carefully constructed defenses. With effort, he stepped back, breaking the spell. We should get some rest. The storm might clear by morning. He insisted she take the lower bunk while he spread his bedroll near the fire. As Sophia settled beneath the rough blankets, she found herself watching Dawn's profile against the firelight, wondering about the man behind the stoic exterior, the man who had risked his life to save a stranger from a river, who pursued justice with single-minded determination, and who had shown her nothing but respect despite their unusual circumstances. Sleep came slowly, lulled by the rhythm of the rain and the knowledge that, for tonight at least, they were safe from the dangers that awaited them in Denver. The storm passed during the night, leaving behind a washed, clean world of glistening leaves and mud-slicked trails. They set out at first light, Dawn estimating they could make up some of their lost time if the conditions held. Sophia found riding her own horse liberating after the previous days of sharing Dawn's mount. The mare was even tempered and responsive, requiring little guidance as she followed Dawn's stallion along the trail. You ride well for a city girl, Dawn remarked after watching her navigate a particularly steep section of trail. My father believed women should be accomplished in more than just needlepoint and piano playing, Sophia replied with a smile. He was quite progressive in his thinking. Sounds like a man I would have respected. I think he would have liked you too, she said, surprising herself with the realization that it was true. Her scholarly father had valued honesty and integrity above all else, qualities Dawn Hollister possessed in abundance. They made good progress throughout the morning, stopping briefly around midday to rest the horses and eat a cold meal. The terrain was gradually changing, the mountains giving way to rolling foothills as they continued westward. Denver's in a basin, Dawn explained as they rode. Sits right where the plains meet the mountains. Once we clear these foothills, we'll have about a day's ride across flatter ground. What will we do when we reach the city? Sophia asked. First, find you proper lodging. There's a respectable boarding house where I've stayed before. Then I'll contact Marshal Wilson. He's a good man, honest. He'll want to hear your story and help us plan how to catch the Wells brothers. And after they're caught and tried, Sophia kept her tone casual, though the question had been weighing on her mind. Dawn was silent for a moment. That depends on the outcome and on what you decide to do next. My position in Silver Creek may not still be available, she mused. I was due to arrive 2 days ago. Denver's growing fast. An educated woman like yourself would have opportunities there. They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Around mid-afternoon, they crested a ridge that offered a sweeping view of the landscape ahead, rolling hills giving way to the vast expanse of the plains, with the distant smudge of Denver just visible on the horizon. We'll make camp early tonight, Dawn decided. There's a good spot about an hour ahead with a spring. The horses need the rest, and we should reach Denver by tomorrow afternoon. As they continued their journey, Sophia found herself filled with conflicting emotions. Part of her was eager to reach civilization, to see justice done for the attempt on her life. Yet another part was strangely reluctant for this journey to end. In just a few days, her perspective on life and on herself had shifted dramatically. Back in Boston, she had been Miss Blackwood, the professor's dutiful daughter, bound by social conventions and expectations. Out here, riding beside this taciturn bounty hunter, she was simply Sophia, a woman discovering her own strength and resilience. The campsite Dawn had mentioned proved to be a pleasant grove of cottonwoods surrounding a clear spring. While he tended to the horses, Sophia gathered wood for a fire, taking pride in applying the skills he had taught her the previous night. "You're a quick study," Dawn commented, watching as she arranged the kindling. "I've always enjoyed learning new things," she replied, striking a match and carefully lighting the small teepee of twigs she'd constructed. "Though I admit this is quite different from the subjects I studied at my father's insistence." "What were those?" "Literature, mathematics, natural philosophy, languages," Sophia listed, feeding the growing flames with larger sticks. "My father believed women's minds were as capable as men's, though few of his colleagues agreed." "He was right," Dawn said simply, beginning to prepare their evening meal. "Out here, capability matters more than gender. I've known women who could outshoot, outride, and outthink most men." As darkness fell, they sat beside the fire eating the rabbit Dawn had snared and roasted. The night was clear, the stars emerging one by one in the vast canopy above them. "Tell me something about yourself that no one else knows," Sophia said impulsively, breaking a comfortable silence. Dawn raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a request, Miss Blackwood. We've shared a horse, faced a storm, and are about to confront dangerous criminals together," she pointed out. "Surely that earns me one secret." A faint smile touched his lips. "Fair enough." He considered for a moment, then said, "I write poetry." Sophia stared at him in surprise. "Poetry? Don't look so shocked," he said dryly. "Even bounty hunters have thoughts that need expressing." "I'm not shocked, I'm impressed," she clarified. Would you share some with me?" Dawn looked distinctly uncomfortable. "They're not very good." "I don't believe that for a moment." He sighed, then gazed into the fire as if finding the words there. When he spoke, his voice was low but clear. "Stars above the prairie wide, witness to the things I've done. Some for justice, some for pride, all beneath the setting sun. Tracks I follow, souls I hunt, men who have chosen darker paths. Life out here is often blunt, marked by blood and aftermath. Yet beauty finds me, unexpected, in dawn light on a mountain stream, or eyes that see me unrejected, more than I have ever seemed." Silence fell when he finished, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant call of a night bird. Sophia felt something shift in her chest, a recognition, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. "That was beautiful," she said softly. Dawn cleared his throat, obviously uncomfortable with her praise. "Your turn. Something no one else knows about Sophia Blackwood." She hesitated, then decided to match his honesty with her own. "I came west not just because I needed employment, but because I was suffocating in Boston. After my father died, my aunt tried to arrange a marriage for me with a man 40 years my senior, a colleague of my father's who had always looked at me in ways that made my skin crawl." She stared into the flames. "Everyone told me I should be grateful. A spinster of 25 with no fortune has few prospects," they said. "So you ran," Dawn observed without judgment. "I chose a different path," Sophia corrected. "The advertisement for a teacher in Silver Creek appeared in the newspaper the very day my aunt told me she had accepted the professor's proposal on my behalf. It felt like providence. And now, what will you choose when this is over?" It was the question that had been circling in her mind throughout their journey. "I don't know," she admitted. "For the first time in my life, I feel as though I'm truly making my own decisions rather than following a path others have laid out for me. It's frightening and exhilarating all at once." Dawn nodded as if he understood perfectly. Freedom often feels that way at first. They fell silent again, the weight of unspoken thoughts hanging between them. Sophia was acutely aware that tomorrow they would reach Denver, returning to civilization and its constraints. This interlude of shared campfires and unguarded conversations would end. Before she could examine the unexpected sadness this realization brought, Dawn rose to his feet. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." As had become their routine, he prepared her bedroll in the most comfortable spot while making his own some distance away. But as Sophia lay looking up at the stars, sleep eluded her. Her mind kept returning to Dawn's poem, to the unexpected depth it revealed in this man of few words. "More than I have ever seemed," she whispered to herself, wondering what else lay beneath his carefully maintained exterior. Dawn, too, found sleep elusive that night. He had never shared his poetry with anyone before, and the vulnerability of the act left him unsettled. More troubling still were the feelings taking root within him, feelings he had not allowed himself to experience in many years. Sophia Blackwood was not merely beautiful. She was intelligent, resilient, and possessed a quiet courage that earned his respect. In the space of a few days, she had somehow slipped past defenses built over a lifetime of loss and solitude. Tomorrow they would reach Denver, and the reality of their situation would reassert itself. She was an educated, refined woman with a future ahead of her. He was a bounty hunter with a past best left buried. Their paths had crossed by chance, nothing more, yet as he finally drifted toward sleep, Dawn couldn't help but wonder if some encounters were guided by more than mere chance. Denver in 1876 was a city in transition, part frontier town, part burgeoning metropolis. As Sophia and Dawn rode down Larimer Street, she was struck by the contrast between elegant brick buildings and rough wooden structures, between ladies in fashionable dresses and miners in dirt-encrusted clothes. "It's so vibrant," she remarked, taking in the bustling activity around them. "2 decades ago, there was nothing here but a few tents," Dawn told her. "Gold and silver changed everything. Now it's the hub of the territory." He led them to a 3-story brick building on a quieter side street. A discreet sign identified it as Mrs. Abernathy's lodging house for respectable ladies. "Wait here," Dawn said, dismounting. "I'll speak with Mrs. Abernathy." He returned shortly with a stern-looking woman of about 60, whose expression softened slightly as she appraised Sophia. "Miss Blackwood, I'm Mrs. Abernathy. Mr. Hollister has explained your situation, that you were robbed on your journey and he aided you in reaching Denver safely." She gave Dawn a pointed look. "I have a suitable room available, and we can provide some necessary items until you're settled." Sophia understood the fiction Dawn had created far more acceptable than the truth of their journey together. "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. Your kindness is most appreciated." After helping Sophia with her few belongings, Dawn explained his next steps. "I'll stable the horses, then go to the marshal's office. It would be best if you rested today. I'll return this evening to discuss how to proceed." Sophia nodded, suddenly reluctant to see him go. In the context of the city with its rules and proprieties, the easy companionship they had developed on the trail seemed impossibly distant. "Dawn," she said quietly, using his given name deliberately. "Be careful." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps at her concern. "Always am," he replied with a slight tip of his hat before turning to leave. Mrs. Abernathy showed Sophia to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor, furnished with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a washstand. After days on the trail, the prospect of a proper bath and clean clothes was heavenly. "Mr. Hollister has arranged for a dressmaker to call on you this afternoon," Mrs. Abernathy informed her. "He mentioned your belongings were lost in the incident." Sophia was touched by Dawn's thoughtfulness. "That's very kind of him." "He's a peculiar man, Mr. Hollister," the older woman remarked. "Known him for some years now, comes and goes, always polite, pays promptly, never causes trouble, but there's something in his eyes." She shook her head. "Well, no matter, lunch is at noon in the dining room. I'll send up hot water for your bath directly." Left alone, Sophia sank onto the bed, suddenly overcome by exhaustion. The past days had been a whirlwind of danger, fear, and unexpected connection. Now, in this quiet room, the reality of her situation finally hit her full force. She had no position, very little money, and was about to testify against dangerous men. Her future, which had seemed so clearly defined when she left Boston, was now entirely uncertain. Yet strangely, amid this uncertainty, Sophia felt more alive than she had in years. The woman who had boarded that stagecoach in Denver proper, cautious, bound by convention, seemed like a stranger now. After bathing and resting, Sophia met with the dressmaker Dawn had arranged. By evening, she had two simple but well-made dresses, one practical day dress in deep blue and one more formal gown in forest green. The woman had also provided necessary undergarments and toiletries. As promised, Dawn returned shortly after sunset. Mrs. Abernathy showed him to a small private parlor where Sophia waited, her hair neatly arranged and wearing her new blue dress. Dawn paused in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he took in her transformed appearance. For her part, Sophia noticed he had also refreshed himself. His clothes were clean, his face freshly shaved, though he retained the rugged presence that set him apart from the city men she was accustomed to. "You look well, Miss Blackwood," he said formally, aware of Mrs. Abernathy hovering nearby. "As do you, Mr. Hollister," she replied, matching his tone. "Please, won't you sit down?" Once they were alone, the formality between them eased somewhat, though not entirely. The walls of civilization had already begun to rebuild around them. "I spoke with Marshal Wilson," Dawn began. "He's a good man, trustworthy. I've explained the situation, and he wants to meet with you tomorrow morning to take your statement." "Have the Wells brothers arrived in Denver?" Sophia asked. "Not yet, but my contacts at the livery stables and hotels are watching for them. They're likely taking a different route or moving more slowly to avoid suspicion." Dawn leaned forward slightly. "The marshal believes your testimony, combined with catching them in the act, will be enough to see them hang." The bluntness of his statement reminded Sophia of the stakes involved. How will you catch them?" "We'll set a trap. The marshal will put out word that he's traveling to Colorado Springs for a week, which will make the Wells brothers think security at the bank will be lighter. I'll be watching the bank, along with some deputies Wilson trusts. And my role, for now, simply give your statement, then stay safely here until it's over." Dawn's expression was firm. "These men already tried to kill you once. I won't give them another opportunity." Sophia wanted to argue but recognized the wisdom in his caution. "Very well. But I want to be present when they're brought to justice." Dawn studied her for a moment, then nodded. "That can be arranged once they're behind bars." There was an awkward pause, neither quite knowing how to proceed now that their immediate purpose was being addressed. "The dresses are lovely," Sophia said finally. "Thank you for your thoughtfulness." "It seemed necessary," Dawn replied with a shrug, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I've also arranged to have your horse sold. The money should help until you decide on your next steps." "My next steps," Sophia repeated thoughtfully. "I suppose I should inquire whether the position in Silver Creek is still available." Dawn's expression gave nothing away. "Or you might consider opportunities here in Denver. The city is growing rapidly. Schools are being established. Perhaps." Sophia hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. "And what about you? After the Wells brothers are captured, what then?" "There's always another bounty," he said simply. "Always another trail to follow." The prospect of him riding away, returning to his solitary existence, created an unexpected ache in Sophia's chest. In just a few days, this man had become important to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. "It seems strange," she said softly, "how quickly circumstances can change. A week ago, I was a passenger on a stagecoach with a clear destination and purpose. Now everything is uncertain." "Not everything," Dawn countered. "You're still the same woman, intelligent, courageous, determined. Those qualities will serve you well, whatever path you choose." His assessment warmed her, especially coming from a man who chose his words with such care. "Thank you for everything." Dawn stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "I'll call for you tomorrow at 9 to go to the marshal's office. Try to rest tonight." As he turned to leave, Sophia called after him, "Dawn." He paused, looking back at her. "Be careful, the Wells brothers are dangerous men." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "So am I, Miss Blackwood, so am I." After he left, Sophia stood at the window watching his tall figure move down the street until he disappeared around a corner. Only then did she acknowledge the truth she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with Dawn Hollister. The realization was as frightening as it was exhilarating. Love had never been part of her practical plans for independence. Moreover, Dawn was unlike any man she had ever known, a complex blend of harshness and gentleness, of justice and mercy, of solitude and unexpected poetry. Whether he could ever return such feelings, whether there could be any future for two people from such different worlds, these were questions Sophia couldn't answer. For now, she could only wait, hope, and prepare to face the men who had tried to take her life. The next morning, Dawn arrived precisely at 9, dressed in a manner that surprised Sophia. Gone was the trail-worn bounty hunter. In his place stood a man in a well-cut dark suit and crisp white shirt. He still wore his gun belt, she noticed, and his eyes retained their vigilant assessment of everything around him. "You look different," she remarked as they walked toward the marshal's office. "Appearances matter in cities," he replied simply. "People judge quickly." Marshal Wilson proved to be a broad-shouldered man with a carefully trimmed beard and intelligent eyes. He listened attentively as Sophia recounted the events on the stagecoach and at the river, taking detailed notes and asking clarifying questions. "Miss Blackwood, I'm grateful for your courage in coming forward," he said when she had finished. "The Wells brothers have been suspected in several bank robberies across the territory, but witnesses tend to disappear or change their stories when it comes time for trial." "They won't intimidate me," Sophia stated firmly. The marshal exchanged a glance with Dawn. "Nevertheless, we'll keep your involvement quiet for now. The story around town is simply that Mr. Hollister has brought in a lady friend from out east." Sophia felt her cheeks warm at the implication, but recognized the practical value of the deception. "I understand." They spent the next hour discussing the plan to capture the Wells brothers. The marshal had already positioned trusted deputies to watch the main roads into town and the Denver City Bank itself. "We believe they'll make their move within the week," Wilson explained. "They typically observe a bank for several days before acting." "In the meantime," Dawn added, "you should maintain a normal routine. Take meals at the boarding house, perhaps visit a few shops or the library, but always with an escort. I've arranged for a deputy's wife to accompany you when I can't be present." Sophia wanted to object to being treated like a porcelain doll in need of protection, but the seriousness in Dawn's eyes stopped her. This wasn't about propriety, it was about keeping her alive. "Very well," she agreed, "though I hope this will be resolved quickly." "As do we all," the marshal said, rising to indicate their meeting was concluded. "Mr. Hollister knows how to reach me if there are any developments. Until then, welcome to Denver, Miss Blackwood." The next few days passed in a strange limbo for Sophia. During the day, she explored Denver with Mrs. Reynolds, the deputy's friendly wife, visiting shops and tearrooms as though she were simply a lady enjoying the city's offerings. In the evenings, Dawn would call at the boarding house to provide updates, though there was little news to share. On the third evening, as they sat in Mrs. Abernathy's parlor under the watchful eye of the landlady, Sophia noticed Dawn seemed more tense than usual. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "Has something happened?" "The Wells brothers arrived in Denver this morning," he confirmed. "They're staying at the Silver Dollar Hotel under false names, but my contact recognized them." "Then it's beginning," Sophia said, her heart quickening. "They visited the bank today, posing as businessmen from Kansas City. According to the bank manager, they asked about opening accounts for their mining supply company." Dawn's expression was grim. "They're laying the groundwork, establishing themselves as legitimate customers. How long before they make their move?" "Based on their past patterns, 2 or 3 days at most. They're cautious but not patient." Sophia nodded, absorbing this information. "What happens when you catch them?" "They'll be held in the jail until the circuit judge arrives next week. The trial would follow shortly after." Dawn hesitated, then added, "If all goes according to plan, this could be resolved within a fortnight." A fortnight. 2 weeks until this chapter of her life would close. 2 weeks until Dawn would likely ride away following the next bounty. The thought created a hollow feeling in her chest. "I've been thinking about my future," she said abruptly. I wrote to the Silver Creek School Board explaining my delay, but I received word today that they've hired another teacher. Dawn's expression gave nothing away. I'm sorry to hear that. Actually, I'm not entirely disappointed. Denver has possibilities I hadn't considered. She took a breath. Marshall Wilson mentioned that his wife is on the committee establishing a new school for girls here in the city. Apparently, they're seeking teachers with Eastern education. Something flickered in Dawn's eyes, surprise, perhaps even hope, but his voice remained carefully neutral. That sounds like a good opportunity. It would mean staying in Denver, at least for a while, Sophia continued, watching him closely for any reaction. Before Dawn could respond, Mrs. Abernathy entered with tea, effectively ending their private conversation. The moment passed, leaving Sophia uncertain whether she had imagined the brief change in his expression. As Dawn prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Be especially vigilant tomorrow. The Wells brothers know this city, and while I don't think they're aware you survived, we can't take chances. I understand, Sophia assured him. Mrs. Reynolds and I are only planning to visit the library. Dawn nodded, seemingly satisfied. I'll call tomorrow evening with any news. He hesitated, then added quietly, Take care, Sophia. It was the first time he had used her given name since they arrived in Denver, and the simple intimacy of it warmed her more than she would have thought possible. And you, Dawn, she replied softly. Be safe. The following day dawned clear and warm. Sophia and Mrs. Reynolds spent a pleasant morning at Denver's small but well-stocked library, where Sophia lost herself in books she hadn't had access to since leaving Boston. They ate lunch at a quiet cafe, then decided to walk along Cherry Creek before returning to the boarding house. It was as they were crossing Arapahoe Street that Sophia saw him Harvey Wells, the banker who had pushed her into the river, emerging from a tobacconist's shop less than 20 yards away. She froze, instinctively clutching Mrs. Reynolds' arm. What is it, dear? The older woman asked, concerned. That man, Sophia whispered, forcing herself to keep walking. The one in the gray suit with the gold watch chain, that's Harvey Wells, Mrs. Reynolds, to her credit, didn't turn to stare but continued walking naturally. Are you certain? Absolutely. Sophia's heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone on the street must hear it. We need to find Dawn or the marshal. Marshal Wilson's office is 3 blocks from here. We'll go there directly. They walked at a pace that wouldn't attract attention, though every instinct screamed at Sophia to run. She kept her face partially turned away, hoping Wells wouldn't glance in their direction. They had nearly reached the corner when disaster struck. A young boy running along the boardwalk collided with Sophia, sending them both stumbling. As she regained her balance and helped the child to his feet, she looked up directly into the surprised face of Harvey Wells, who had been walking toward them. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by shock and then fury. You, he exclaimed. That's impossible. Sophia froze for only a fraction of a second before making her decision. Run, she urged Mrs. Reynolds, pushing the older woman ahead of her as she herself turned and fled in the opposite direction. Wells shouted something she couldn't make out, but she didn't stop to listen. Her only thought was to lead him away from Mrs. Reynolds, to give the woman time to reach the marshal's office. Sophia darted down an alleyway between buildings, her practical boots allowing her to move faster than would have been possible in the fashionable shoes she'd worn in Boston. Behind her, she could hear Wells pursuing, his heavier footfalls echoing off the narrow walls of the alley. Sophia emerged onto a parallel street, quickly assessing her options. The main thoroughfare was to her right, crowded with people who might offer safety in numbers. To her left, the street led toward the creek and fewer potential witnesses. Instinctively, she turned right, pushing through startled pedestrians as she ran. If she could reach the hotel where Dawn was watching the bank or the marshal's office. A strong hand suddenly grasped her arm, yanking her into a recessed doorway. Sophia opened her mouth to scream, only to have it covered by a familiar calloused palm. It's me, Dawn's voice murmured in her ear. Don't make a sound. He removed his hand from her mouth but kept her pressed against the shadowed wall of the doorway, his body shielding her from view. Moments later, Wells rushed past their hiding place, his face red with exertion and rage. "How did you?" Sophia began once he was gone. "Mrs. Reynolds found me watching the bank. She told me what happened." Dawn's face was tight with controlled anger. "Are you hurt?" "No, just frightened." Sophia was suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the protective way his body curved around hers. "What now?" "Now we move up our timeline. Wells will tell his brother you're alive, and they'll either flee Denver or try to eliminate you before you can testify." Dawn's eyes were intense as they met hers. "I'm taking you somewhere safe until this is over." "The boarding house is the first place they'll look," he interrupted. "No, I have somewhere else in mind, but first we need to get you off the streets." Dawn led her through a series of back alleys and service passages, moving with the confidence of someone who had memorized every possible route through the city. They eventually emerged near a modest hotel on the outskirts of the business district. "Wait here," Dawn instructed, positioning her in a sheltered doorway. "I'll make sure it's safe." He returned minutes later and quickly ushered her inside and up to a small room on the third floor. It was simply furnished but clean, with a narrow bed, a chair, and a small table. "This is your room?" Sophia asked, noting the single carpet bag in the corner. "I keep it as a base when I'm working in Denver," Dawn confirmed. "Few people know about it, including the Wells brothers, especially them." He moved to the window, checking the street below before drawing the curtains. "You'll be safe here while I find them." "You're leaving?" Sophia couldn't keep the alarm from her voice. "I have to. Wells has seen you, which means their plans will change. I need to find them before they disappear." Dawn's expression softened slightly at her obvious distress. "I've sent word to Marshal Wilson. He'll have a deputy posted outside. No one will get past him." Sophia wanted to object, to insist on going with him, but she recognized the logic in his plan. She would only slow him down, perhaps even endanger him if he was focused on protecting her rather than capturing the Wells brothers. "Be careful," she said instead. "They're desperate now." "So am I," Dawn replied with grim determination. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small Derringer pistol. "Do you know how to use this?" Sophia stared at the weapon, momentarily taken aback. "My father taught me basic firearms handling, but I've never." "It's simple. Remove the safety here, aim, and pull the trigger. It only has 2 shots, so make them count." Dawn placed the pistol in her hands. "I don't expect you'll need it, but just in case." The weight of the small gun was both frightening and oddly reassuring. "Thank you." Dawn moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to her with an expression she couldn't quite read. For a moment, it seemed he might say something more, but instead he simply nodded once and left, the door closing firmly behind him. Alone in the unfamiliar room, Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, the Derringer clutched in her hand. Outside, she could hear the normal sounds of the city, continuing horses and wagons on the street, distant voices, the whistle of a train arriving at the station. Life proceeding as usual while hers hung in precarious balance. She thought about Dawn, out there hunting the men who had tried to kill her. The danger he faced on her behalf added another layer to the complex feelings she harbored for him. In Boston, she had dreamed of independence, of a life defined by her own choices rather than society's expectations. She had never anticipated meeting someone who would make her question whether independence was truly what she wanted most. As afternoon faded into evening, Sophia paced the small room, anxiety growing with each passing hour. The deputy posted outside had brought her a simple meal, but she had barely touched it. Her thoughts kept returning to Dawn, wondering where he was, whether he was safe. It was nearing midnight when she heard footsteps outside the door, heavier than those of the deputy who had checked on her periodically. Sophia grabbed the Derringer from the bedside table, pointing it toward the door with shaking hands. A soft knock sounded, followed by Dawn's voice. "It's me." Relief flooded through her as she rushed to unlock the door. Dawn entered quickly, locking it again behind him. He looked exhausted, with a small cut above his right eye and dust covering his clothes. "What happened?" Sophia asked, setting the pistol aside. "Did you find them?" "We found them preparing to leave town. There was a confrontation," Dawn removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. Harvey Wells is dead, his brother is in custody. Sophia sank onto the bed, absorbing this news. Dead, how? He drew on the marshal's deputies, gave them no choice. Dawn's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. James Wells surrendered after seeing his brother fall. He's in the jail now, under heavy guard. So it's over, Sophia said quietly. Almost. You'll still need to testify when the judge arrives, but yes, the immediate danger has passed. Dawn leaned against the wall, the tension of the day evident in the lines of his body. You can return to the boarding house tomorrow if you wish. And you, what will you do now? Dawn was silent for a long moment. The marshal will pay the bounty once James Wells is convicted. After that. He shrugged. There's always another job. Something in his tone, a resignation, perhaps even a reluctance, gave Sophia courage. Does there have to be another job, I mean? He looked at her then, really looked at her, his gray eyes searching her face. What are you asking, Sophia? I'm asking if there might be a reason for you to stay in Denver. She rose from the bed, taking a step toward him. A reason beyond the next bounty. Dawn remained perfectly still, but she could see the conflict in his eyes. You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what I've done, the life I've led. I know enough, Sophia countered, taking another step closer. I know you risked your life to save a stranger from a river. I know you've treated me with nothing but respect and kindness. I know there's poetry in your soul that belies the hardness you show the world. Poetry doesn't erase blood, he said quietly. I've killed men, Sophia, made choices you can't imagine. We've all made choices. Mine brought me west alone to an uncertain future. Yours led you to that riverbank where you saved my life. She was standing directly before him now, close enough to see the pulse beating in his throat. Perhaps neither of us needs to face our futures alone. Dawn's expression softened, vulnerability showing through the cracks in his carefully maintained facade. You deserve better than a worn-out bounty hunter with too many ghosts. What I deserve is the chance to choose for myself, Sophia replied firmly. And I choose you, Dawn Hollister, if you'll have me. For a breathless moment, they stood in silence, the weight of possibility suspended between them. Then Dawn raised his hand, gently touching her cheek with calloused fingers that belied their tenderness. Are you certain? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. A life with me won't be easy. I've never been more certain of anything, Sophia answered, covering his hand with her own. And I don't want easy, I want real. The last of Dawn's resistance crumbled. With exquisite care, he drew her closer, one arm encircling her waist while his other hand cradled her face. When his lips finally met hers, Sophia felt as though every moment of her life, every choice, every hardship, even being thrown into that river had been leading her to this man, this embrace, this profound connection that transcended their different worlds. The kiss deepened, months of solitude and years of longing expressed in the way they clung to each other. When they finally parted, Dawn rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. I never expected you, he confessed softly. Never thought I could feel this way again, or that someone like you could want someone like me. Sophia smiled, her heart full to bursting. Sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to exactly where we're meant to be. 2 weeks later, James Wells stood trial for attempted murder, bank robbery, and various other crimes. With Sophia's testimony and the evidence Marshal Wilson had gathered, the verdict was swift and decisive, guilty on all counts with a sentence of hanging to be carried out within the month. As they left the courthouse, Dawn took Sophia's hand, a gesture that still sent a thrill through her despite the increasing frequency of such touches between them. How does it feel? He asked. Knowing justice has been served, like closing a chapter, she replied thoughtfully. And opening a new one. They walked in comfortable silence toward the small house they had rented on the outskirts of Denver, a modest dwelling with a view of the mountains, far grander than Dawn's hotel room, but humble enough to suit their means. With the bounty from James Wells and Sophia's new position at the Denver School for Young Ladies, they had enough to start building a life together. I received a letter today, Dawn said as they approached their home, from an old friend in the Rangers. He's the sheriff in a growing town near Colorado Springs now, says he could use a deputy with experience. Sophia looked at him curiously. Are you considering it, perhaps? Dawn's expression was contemplative. Bounty hunting is a solitary life. Being a deputy would mean stability, a community. A future, he squeezed her hand, a future with you. Is that what you want? Sophia asked, her heart quickening. Dawn stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The setting sun cast a golden glow over his features, softening the hard edges that life had carved into him. What I want is to wake up beside you every morning, he said with simple honesty. To build something that matters, to see justice done without always being the one pulling the trigger, to be the man you believe I can be. Sophia felt tears prick her eyes at the raw emotion in his voice. You already are that man, Dawn. You always have been, you just couldn't see it. He smiled then, one of those rare, transformative smiles that changed his entire countenance. I see it through your eyes, and that makes all the difference. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across their path, Dawn and Sophia continued toward home, their fingers entwined, their futures bound together by a river's danger and a hand extended in the moment when it mattered most. 5 years later, the town of Willow Creek had grown from a small settlement to a thriving community. The silver mines in the surrounding mountains had brought prosperity, and with it, the infrastructure of civilization, a school, a church, several businesses, and a well-respected sheriff's office where Deputy Marshal Dawn Hollister had earned a reputation for fairness and unwavering justice. The Hollister home stood on a gentle rise at the edge of town, a comfortable 2-story house with a wide porch where Sophia often sat in the evenings, grading papers, or simply watching the mountains change colors as the sun set. As headmistress of Willow Creek School, she had transformed education in the town, bringing Eastern standards and progressive ideas that had initially raised eyebrows but eventually won respect. On this particular evening, Sophia sat in her favorite rocking chair, a small leather-bound book open in her lap. Inside were poems written in Dawn's distinctive handwriting, verses he had composed throughout their years together, chronicling their journey from that fateful day at the river to the life they now shared. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. Dawn appeared on the road, riding at an easy pace, their 3-year-old daughter Sarah seated before him on the saddle. The child's laughter carried on the breeze as Dawn pointed out something in the distance, probably a deer or fox that had caught his tracker's eye. Sophia rose to meet them, her heart still skipping at the sight of her husband even after years of marriage. Dawn had changed in subtle ways since they'd settled in Willow Creek. The perpetual vigilance in his eyes had softened. His smiles came more readily, and while he would always carry the quiet strength that had first drawn her to him, there was a peace about him now that spoke of healing old wounds. "Mama," Sarah called out, waving excitedly. "Papa showed me how to track rabbit prints, did he now?" Sophia replied with a smile as Dawn reined in his horse and dismounted, lifting their daughter down with practiced ease. "And were there many rabbits to track?" "A whole family," Sarah reported seriously. "Papa says they're getting ready for winter, just like us." Dawn set the child on her feet, then leaned down to kiss Sophia gently. "Sorry we're late. Someone was very interested in every track and bush along the way." "The curious mind should never be rushed," Sophia quoted, one of her father's favorite sayings that had become something of a family motto. Sarah ran inside to find her older brother, Daniel, who at 4 was already showing signs of inheriting his father's quiet intensity and his mother's love of books. The sounds of their play soon drifted through the open windows as Dawn and Sophia remained on the porch, his arm around her waist, her head resting against his shoulder. Marshal Wilson's letter arrived, Sophia mentioned. He and Mrs. Wilson will visit next month. They're eager to see how Willow Creek has grown, Dawn nodded. It'll be good to see them. We owe them a great deal. We owe a river and a desperate moment even more, Sophia mused. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been tracking the Wells brothers that day. I don't, Dawn said simply. Some things are meant to be, even if the path getting there isn't what we expected. Sophia smiled at his words, remembering the taciturn man who had once claimed he had no poetry in his soul. Speaking of unexpected paths, Mrs. Johnson at the Mercantile mentioned that a new family has arrived in town. They have twins Sarah's age. I thought I might call on them tomorrow, help them get settled. Always the welcoming committee, Dawn teased gently, pressing a kiss to her temple. This town gave us a home when we were finding our way, Sophia reminded him. It seems only right to extend the same to others. They stood in comfortable silence as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In the distance, the mountains stood as they always had, enduring, majestic, a reminder of the wild beauty that had drawn them both west in different ways. I have something for you, Dawn said suddenly, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small wooden box, carved with intricate patterns of leaves and flowing water. Had it made special by that new woodworker in town. Sophia opened the box to find a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a river current, with a small pearl nestled in its curve. It's beautiful, she breathed, touching it gently. A reminder, Dawn said, his voice deep with emotion. Of the moment that brought us together, the river that tried to take you became the current that carried us both to something neither of us expected to find. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as she turned to face him fully. After all these years, you still surprise me, Dawn Hollister. Planning to keep doing that for at least 50 more, he promised, drawing her close. As twilight settled over Willow Creek, Dawn and Sophia Hollister stood together on their porch, the sounds of their children's laughter filling the home they had built. From desperate beginnings on a riverbank, a hand extended. A life saved, they had forged a love as enduring as the mountains that surrounded them, as vital as the river that had brought them together, and as unexpected as finding poetry in the heart of a bounty hunter who had once believed himself beyond redemption. Grab my hand if you want to live, he had called to her that day, not knowing he was offering far more than rescue from a raging river. He was offering a future neither of them could have imagined, a future they continued to build together, one day, one choice, one moment at a time.